So there we go. Okay, Barna Research reports a percentage of American adults claiming to be Christian has dropped from 89% in 1989 to 78% in 2009. So what we're seeing is a slow, gradual, but a drop nonetheless of practicing Christians, individuals who name the name of Christ here in the United States. And then in 2014, we see that the number was a little over just 70%. And so the church is not growing. The church is actually getting less and less as time goes on. While church attendance is strong, the people inside have less and less influence over education, over law, and especially culture. And certainly we've seen that in the last 8 years or so. And unless the tide turns, America will be as secular as Britain. Some have said that Britain will be a Muslim nation in 20 years' time, approximately 20 to 25 years' time, England will be a Muslim nation. And then we can see the wholesale destruction of castles, cathedrals, and churches, because they will not tolerate those kinds of structures. So we see that there's a massive increase in secular thought or non-Christian thought, both here in America but throughout the world. And today, over 23%, or just a little less than one person out of four here in the United States has a secular worldview, as Chris was talking about. So about 25%, maybe a little less, have a purely atheistic or agnostic worldview. And as Chris has shown in the slide there just earlier, 1 Peter 3:15 is a verse that I use a lot when I do speaking. It says, "But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you." That is, have an apologia, have an apologetic. Know why you believe, what you believe, not only when it comes to your origin, but also your destiny as well. Know why you believe, what you believe. That's what my wife Jan and I have been teaching our 4 children who are now grown and out of the house. This is something else that we like to emphasize in creation science circles, and that is Christians need to identify where science leaves off and philosophy begins. And, you would be able to answer a lot of questions and have that apologia, that apologetic, if you only understand where science leaves off, in other words, what we can observe and test and repeat, and then see where philosophy begins, a philosophical construct that is so prevalent in secular evolutionary teaching. Well, that brings us to the definition of science, which is a systematic study of phenomena based on experimental investigation, including observation. Did you know about 70% of what we call empirical science is nothing more than sitting down and observing a process or a phenomena? And then, of course, testability and repeating is important as well. So this is what we call empirical science. Are creationists opposed to empirical science? Not at all, not at all. We embrace science. We love science and various creation science outlets. Sometimes the accusation is made by the secular community that those Christians are creationists. They hate science. And as the old tired saying goes, nothing could be further from the truth. The speakers that you'll hear this weekend all have advanced degrees in science from secular institutions. I got my undergraduate degree in biology from a secular institution. I got my master's in zoology from a secular institution. And then I did my research in graduate school and got it published in a secular scientific publication. And then on top of that, I taught for 9 years in pre-med biology at Pensacola Christian College, where we taught scientific principles. So to make the unfounded accusation that somehow we are unscientific is certainly wrong. Now, we are against this theory that says that we came from a fish. We are against a theory called macroevolution or vertical evolution, but that's a far, far cry from science, which is what we can observe and test and repeat. And nobody has ever observed, tested, or repeated how we came from bacteria or how we came from a fish over the ethereal millions and millions of years of time. So we like science. We embrace science. Science and the Bible, folks, go together beautifully. They go together like butter and bread. They dovetail together perfectly like politics and corruption. And so we enjoy science very much. And as it said back in 1958, a 2-time Nobel Prize winner said that science is a search for truth, the effort to understand the world. Do we agree with that? Absolutely, yes. We agree that science is a search for truth. Back when I was in high school in I was taught that science is a search for truth, okay? And we have no problem with that. But in today's 21st century, where there's a lot of cynicism involved, a lot of people say, well, the truth is relative, or the truth is subjective, or, hey, man, what's true for you may not be true for me. Others say that the truth is unknowable, and there's even some that say there is no truth. But what would a creation scientist say to all that? Well, we go back to the book of absolutes, the book of historical accuracy called the Bible, as Chris has said. And we read in the Bible where Jesus saith unto them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that no one comes to the Father except by me. And so what we do in creation science circles is to think God's thoughts after him and understand there is truth, and Jesus Christ is the truth. He is the creator. And since he's the creator, we would say that all science is creation science. Boy, that makes a lot of people upset. All science is creation science, and all truth is God's truth. And that, as you see here, science is the search for truth. And finally, number 4, Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the truth. So all science is creation science, all truth is God's truth. Science is the search for truth, and Jesus is the truth. So we love to do science, and guess what? There were great Bible-believing scientists in the past like Newton, Kepler, Boyle, Maxwell, Faraday, George Washington Carver, Louis Pasteur. All of these individuals believed that in the beginning God created, and they also did what? Science. And they made very significant scientific discoveries, didn't they? Amazing scientific discoveries, and they honored God as the creator. And that's politically incorrect today. So we must build our worldview on the Bible, shouldn't we? And too often, and tragically, many well-meaning Christians see that if there's a problem between secular science and the Bible, what do they try and change? The Bible. But we look to the Bible as the authority, the number one authority. And if the Bible and secular science don't agree, guess what? Secular science will have to catch up to what the Bible has said. Boy, there's so many examples I could give, and we don't have time. So, Chris, would you unplug the clock back there? Just go ahead and unplug it for me. I appreciate it. There we go. Well, one example would be that the evolutionists laughed at us when we said there was a worldwide flood and that there was no evidence, supposedly, for a worldwide flood, and the Bible is wrong. Until a book was published called Oceanography in 2013. And the secular author out of La Jolla, California, who is a dyed-in-the-wool atheist, said that this planet was covered with water for 200 million years. All we're asking for is 1 year. The evolutionists gave us 200 million. Thank you very much. And I have that quote in one of my presentations in regard to geology and the Genesis flood. So that's one example. All you had to do is sit tight and wait, because the Bible taught that the world was covered with water. And it's the secular evolutionists that have come up and finally agreed with what the Bible taught all along. Here's another example. Up until about 50 years ago, 45 years ago, geologists were absolutely locked into the uniformitarian philosophy that says that slow, gradual geologic processes spanning millions and millions of years of time is the only way to interpret the history of the earth, specifically the geologic history. And that any idea of any kind of catastrophe was frowned upon by the uniformitarian geologists, until the Alvarez team, Alvarez Sr. and his son, looked at the Yucatan Peninsula there in the Mexican area and decided that there was a giant asteroid that struck the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago that caused the demise or the extinction of the dinosaurs, which, by the way, was a very selective extinction, wasn't it? Didn't cause the extinction of anything else, just those pesky dinosaurs. But what were they saying? They were talking about a worldwide catastrophe. When the asteroid struck that Yucatan Peninsula, allegedly 65 million years ago, that just absolutely covered the earth in some kind of massive cloud, this nuclear winter scenario, was that a worldwide catastrophe? Shake your head like this. It certainly was. Well, what does the Bible teach in Genesis chapter 6 through Genesis chapter 8? A worldwide catastrophe. A flood, right? And it was a catastrophic flood. So again, for the second example, the evolutionists finally have caught up with what the Bible taught all along. There was a worldwide catastrophe. And by the way, an asteroid striking the Earth, that's a worldwide catastrophe with a vengeance. Let's move on. Science continues to provide a wonderful apologia and apologetic for Christianity. Again, we have no fear of science. Science and the Bible go together beautifully. So creation science begins where? In the beginning. When you talk to an astrophysicist, a PhD in physics, she or he will tell you that this universe is composed of three parts. What are the three parts of the universe? You remember from junior high. Time, space. What's the third one, class? Time, space, and matter. See how easy science is? Time, space, and matter. Well, when you look to the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the book of books, it says, in the beginning, that's time. God created the heaven, that's space, and the earth, matter. So in the first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the book of books, God, who has always existed, spoke into existence. We call that an ex nihilo creation, time, space, and matter. And without going into too much more detail, what we find is that there's no other religious writing on this planet that begins so uniquely like the Bible, where you have God who has always existed speaking into existence the time, space, matter universe. By the way, do we live in a universe or a multiverse? Universe. We live in a universe. As one atheist cosmologist said, if you don't want God, he said, you better have a multiverse. If you don't want God, you better have a multiverse. So we live in a universe, don't we? What does the prefix uni mean, class? One, right. So don't pull a wheelie on a unicycle. It's another time-release joke there. So it's time, space, and matter in a universe. Could we say three in one? That's kind of interesting, isn't it? And so when we look to the Bible, we see the creation of everything from people to planets to plants and everything in between. And so here's a question, because it's just us here this evening. Here's a question. How many times do we read in the Bible that God created after their kind, specifically in Genesis chapter 1? How many times do we see that phrase, after its kind, after his kind, after their kind? Any permutation there? How many times in Genesis chapter 1? It's more than 3 times, and it's less than 50. Somebody said it, 10. That's correct. 10 times God is telling us in no uncertain terms that he created after their kind in just one chapter. So do you think maybe God is trying to tell us something? Yeah. He's trying to tell us that he didn't use evolutionary naturalism to affect the origin of the species, not to mention the origin of plants and the origin of the planets and everything else. Because the Bible says, and we go back to what the Bible says, that he created after their kind, after their kind. He said it 10 times. And so most of us here are parents this evening, right? And so when we want our child to understand something, we'll get redundant and repeat ourselves. If we want our child to understand something, we get redundant and repeat ourselves. Okay, right? And so that's why we want the child to understand. It's important. Listen to me. Do you think maybe God is doing the same thing? Boy, if you get that first chapter of Genesis wrong, you've got it wrong all the way through the scriptures. 10 times he told us he created after their kind. And so we find it, and that includes a good example like the puppy dog, right? We all love dogs, don't we? You bet. We had a Canardly dog in California when we lived there. Have you ever seen a Canardly dog? Can hardly tell what kind of dog she was. But you've got these great big Mexican Chihuahuas and those little bitty Great Danes that the ladies carry in their purses and everything in between, right? But dogs have always been dogs, right? Okay, dogs have always been dogs. And we even have horribly mutated dogs like poodles. But dogs have always been dogs, and this one was delicious. Hey, we can have fun tonight, can't we? It's just us here. Did I say that? It's just us here tonight? Okay, quiz question, folks. What is the most popular breed of puppy dog in England and Canada and the United States? It's the same dog in all 3 countries, plus it's the same dog in number of other countries as well. What is it? Somebody said it, and it's not the poodle. Labrador Retriever. So how many different kinds of labs do we have? Well, we got the golden lab there, very cute puppy dog, and the black lab, and I saved the best until last because in Dallas, where I live now, we have Abby the Wonder Dog. She is a chocolate lab, so we have Abby the chocolate lab there. And so they're all labs, aren't they? Just variations. We got the white lab, we got the black lab, the chocolate lab. We have some strange neighbors in our cul-de-sac in Dallas. We're pretty sure they have a meth lab. Okay. We can have some fun. A meth lab. And here's the question of the evening. Think about this. Where did domestic dogs come from? What was their, can I use the word this evening? Origin, right? What was the name of Darwin's infamous book published in 1859 that turned the Western world upside down? What was the name of it? Origin of the Species. What's one thing that Darwin never talked about? The origin of the species. So can we not ask the innocent question this evening, where did the domestic dog come from? We're up to here. That's a scientific measurement right there. We are up to here in domestic dogs. This country is lousy with domestic puppy dogs of all sizes and all shapes. And so I think it's a good question to ask, where did the domestic dogs come from? The evolutionist would have a secular answer to that. And so where did the domestic dog, and they can draw from all sorts of sources there, right? Because we're overrun with domestic dogs. Surely they can answer the question, and the answer is the origin of domestic dogs is poorly understood. Now, I appreciate the secular community for saying that way back in 2015. So they said the origin of the domestic dogs is poorly understood, and we are up to here in domestic dogs. Now, I salute them, and it's not the purpose of me or the organization that I represent to denigrate the evolutionists. I think there's too much of that going on, but I salute them for being honest and saying they don't know the origin of domestic dogs. Here's my point this evening. If they don't know the origin of domestic dogs, then what right do they have to tell us that the first amphibians came from fish? In other words, that fish fins, a 500 million with a B, a 500 million years ago, turned into feet and legs of the first amphibian, the first tetrapod, tetra-4-pod feet. A 500 million years ago, a 500 million years in the unobserved past. So think about that. Let it sink in. If they can't tell us where something as pedestrian as a puppy dog came from, then why are they telling us that fish fins turned into feet and legs of the first amphibian? After all, if you look to the fossil record, you find that fish have always been what? Fish, very good. See how easy science is? Fish have always been fish, and frogs have always been frogs. Again, science is painfully simple. And so fish have always been fish, frogs have always been frogs, and they simply don't know how fish fins turned into feet and legs of the first frogs or tetrapods. This is a book I have in my office. I've not read it once. I've read it twice. It's by Jennifer Clack. And Jennifer Clack is an evolutionary atheist as far as I know, and she wrote this book called Gaining Ground. It was published in 2012. I went through with a highlighter and a pen, and I've got that book. I got it read. But one thing that she never talks about is the origin of the transitional form between fish fins and frog feet and legs. She says in her book, and to her credit, I salute her, I don't know where, don't know when that occurred, in 523 pages. Well, that was in 2012. 2 years later, in 2014, this secular European evolutionary organization said the transitional path between fin structural elements in fish and limbs in tetrapods, four-legged creatures, remains unknown. That's in 2014. Way back in the year 2016, I ran across this article in a secular publication. And in 2016, it's by none other than Jennifer Clack, who is the author of that book. She is one of the four authors. Jennifer Clack, Per Ahlberg, and two others wrote this book a letter in Nature magazine, Life History of the Stem Tetrapod Acanthostega. And she nowhere talks about Acanthostega as being a transitional form between fish and amphibians. So she gives a very good, and her fellow authors gives a very good life history of the stem tetrapod, but they are no closer to identifying what this cryptic transitional form was. Why? Because it never existed. So what we would say, and by the way, can creation scientists make predictions? Shake your head like this. Yeah, that's right. That's part and parcel of good science. Good science will help us to make predictions in the future, make predictions about this or that. So we would make the prediction that based on God's word, based on the Bible, they will never find those critical transitional forms between major groups, major, can I use the word kinds? Because God created after their kind. And so they're looking for something that does not exist. They will never find that transition. By the way, they'll never find the transition between ape-like creatures and people, that critical, whatever that creature would be millions of years ago, as the apes branched off one way and the people branched off the other. That will never be found because, once again, God created after their kind. We have been created in God's image, and we did not evolve from some ape-like ancestor. So that was my introduction. Now, let's get into the presentation in regard to, is it really possible to talk honestly and fairly about scientific evidence for creation? That is the main question this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Is it really possible that we can talk honestly and fairly about evidence for creation, scientific evidence for creation? After all, living things clearly look like they were designed, so how do evolutionists know they were not designed? That's a good question. And certainly when you talk to the secular evolutionist, she or he will candidly say, yes, things look like they're designed. Well, Frank, I'm not convinced. You better show me. Well, certainly design means a designer, right? And if design means a designer, creation means a creator. And the Apostle Paul is very clear in the first chapter of Romans that God's creation is, and he used two words here, clearly seen. Clearly seen. Paul could have just said seen, but he wants us to understand in this 21st century that God's creation is clearly seen, or to use the Sherwin translation, painfully obvious. Clearly seen. And then Paul ends the verse with this warning, and it's from the Apostle Paul, not some creation science organization that says that they are without excuse. So that they are without excuse. Why? Because God's creation is clearly seen. Why? Because God loves us, folks. God loves us. He loves us so much, he's made his creation very, very clear. That you would have to trip over the evidence. The evidence of what? The evidence of creation. And we get some support from some very unlikely sources, such as the infamous Richard Dawkins, the English atheist. Richard Dawkins said, biology is a study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. There you go. Page 1 of his bestseller. He said exactly what the Apostle Paul says. Thank you, Richard Dawkins, the atheist. Then he spends the rest of his book trying to convince the reader that although things look designed, it wasn't by God, it was by some cryptic naturalistic process, natural selection and whatever that is, and mutations. And so certainly when we look at something like the DNA molecule, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, we see clear evidence for design. And by the way, speaking of DNA, this is Francis Crick. Francis Crick was a lifelong atheist who died in 2004. He's not an atheist anymore. But anyway, he said in his book that biologists must constantly, his word, not mine, must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. That reminds me of a verse in the Bible. Where is that? It's in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, where Paul said that God's creation is, two words, thank you, clearly seen. God's creation is clearly seen. And so Francis Crick, the atheist, he was not familiar with the book of Romans, and yet he is saying, folks, look at that. He's saying just exactly what the Apostle Paul is saying. Francis Crick, the atheist, the scientist, the co-discoverer of the DNA molecule, along with Crick and Watson. And by the way, it should have also included a lady who was also very much involved with that, showing X-ray plates. And unfortunately, she was not included in the Nobel Prize there. But anyway, the situation is that here Francis Crick is saying that they have to constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. That lady's name, by the way, was Rosalind Franklin. And she took some X-ray pictures and did a phenomenal job in helping Crick and Watson to discover the spiral helix nature of the DNA molecule, for which only they received the Nobel Prize. Sadly, She died just a few years after that. But Crick was an atheist, and he adamantly maintained that God was not involved. I like this cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes. Mom is saying, "Time for your bath, let's go." And Calvin is putting up his puny little hand and saying, "Sorry, I'm in denial about baths." She says, "Fine, plonk, go ahead and deny it." Then Calvin says, "Nobody respects my denial." And, that's kind of what's happening in the creation-evolution controversy, because evolutionists are in denial about evidence for creation, even though the evidence is clearly seen, as the Apostle Paul says, and we see it from some unlikely atheists, such as the late Francis Crick and also Richard Dawkins. They see things as having been designed, but they would rather worship the creation and not the creator. And that's what secular scientists are doing today. They are certainly worshiping, but it's the creation, not the creator. But the evidence for creation is clearly seen. Look what this one scientist said. I'm not sure if he was a Christian or not. He died just last year. His name is Charles Towns. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He said somehow intelligence must have been involved in the laws of the universe. That reminds me of a verse in the Bible. It's found in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, where the Apostle Paul says that God's creation is clearly seen. So here, this physicist is saying that somehow intelligence must have been involved in the laws of the universe. It's not like God is trying to be cryptic and God is trying to help, is causing us to agonize over who is this creator? Do things really look like they're designed or not? No, God has made his living creation, even though it's been corrupted by sin, very, very obvious, clearly seen. And so the question that we ask in creation science is it wrong to go where the evidence leads? Is it wrong to go where the evidence leads? If things look like they have been designed, can we not go down the design inference? Can we not go down the design path and make that investigation? Well, how is a solar system built? We looked at the universe just now, but how about our solar system? Getting a little bit more local. Yet you might think these disparate bodies are scattered across the solar system without rhyme or reason, said this secular author, as he's talking about the various planets and moons within our solar system. He says, but here's the key, but move any piece of the solar system today or try to add anything more, look at this, and the whole construction would be thrown fatally out of kilter. This reminds me of what Sir Isaac Newton said years ago, centuries ago, when he said that the construction of our solar system, he says, requires a divine arm to impress them. That was his explanation, and a very good explanation it was. And so this Richard Webb asks in this secular publication, New Scientist, and here's the key. He says, so how exactly did this delicate architecture, that's his words, delicate architecture come to be? So we're looking at our solar system and seeing how exquisitely designed our solar system is, how balanced it is, and he asks the rhetorical question, how did this delicate architecture come to be? Interesting. Saturn and Jupiter. A French astrophysicist discovered that the orbits of Jupiter and Saturn keep the Earth's orbit from becoming chaotic. Without orbital stability produced by Jupiter and Saturn, the Earth orbit would make extreme changes, causing instability in our climate and making the Earth uninhabitable. This comes from a secular scientist. Folks, in your devotions this morning, did you thank the Lord for Saturn and Jupiter? And so now we're beginning to understand just why important these large planets are in our solar system, because large planets exert large gravitational fields, not only helping to keep the Earth's orbit stable, I'm happy for that, but also for the fact that these large planets exert a large gravitational field which pulls away comets and asteroids, those pesky comets that might otherwise perforate the Earth. Now, of course, the atheists have their answer, and they say, well, it pulls in as many comets and asteroids to Earth's orbit as it causes them to be avoided, but that has not been substantiated. The fact is we're still here. We're not suffering catastrophic cometary strikes, meteoritic strikes on this planet, that all of these comets just happen to burn up before they hit the Earth, with some exceptions. And I think it's because of Jupiter and Saturn, these large planets that God has put in those orbital characteristics that are basically running interference for us. About 25 years ago, this book was written by two evolutionary atheists. They had no theological axe to grind, but they had a book called, the book is called Rare Earth, and Why Life is Uncommon in the Universe as a subtitle. And oh boy, do they ever write a good apologetic for the Bible, although they, as I say, are not creationists by any stretch of the imagination. They are intellectually honest enough to look at the construct of this planet and see that it is totally, totally unique in the universe. And here's some examples. This comes from Discover magazine a couple of years ago. Discover is no friend of the creationist. Look what this author said. We have a lot of really, really strange coincidences. And all of these coincidences are such that they make life possible. So the secular author, the secular scientist, will look at the construct of this planet, not to mention our solar system in general, and say, wow, really, really strange coincidences. Here's Tom Garrison. I mentioned Tom Garrison because this is the book where he said that the earth was covered with water for 200 million years. We're just asking for 1 year. And he said, what is extraordinary is a happy combination of circumstances. Again, if you have a secular worldview, you cannot praise God and say, wow, look what God has done. You have to worship the creation, not the creator. And so Tom Garrison is an evolutionary atheist. He said, what's extraordinary is a happy combination of circumstances. Our planet's orbit is roughly circular around a relatively stable star. Earth is large enough to hold an atmosphere, but not so large that its gravity would overwhelm. Its neighborhood is tranquil. Supernovae have not scarred its surface with radiation. And so this is another example of where they look at it's a unique situation, the unique part of a solar system that we find ourselves in, and say, wow, a happy combination of circumstances. So secularists will consider coincidences and combinations of circumstances, but they won't contemplate the Creator. They'll consider coincidences and combinations of circumstances, but they won't contemplate the Creator. This is something that nobody expected either, but as more and more research is going into studying the orbital characteristics and velocity of the Earth and the distance of the Earth from the Sun, et cetera, they're finding the Earth's rotation is, as Goldilocks said, just right. You got to say it in a higher voice. Just right. They're very good. See, that's it. See how easy science is? Just right. Everything has to be just right. This Amanda Doyle, writing in Astrobiology magazine, said life cannot exist on a planet that rotates too fast or too slow. This is yet another Goldilocks problem for astrobiologists to consider. The rotation of this planet is just right. Well, what about the moon? I don't want to steal any thunder from Dr. DeYoung if you're going to talk about the moon, Don, but the moon is absolutely amazing. The moon is just right. If somebody were to say to me, Frank, what's your 3 best evidences for creation? Somewhere in that list would be the moon. The moon, everything about the moon is just right. Everything about the moon is perfect. Its rotation, its diameter, its mass, its velocity, distance from the Earth is exactly where the moon should be. As a matter of fact, it is so compelling that 2 evolutionary atheists or agnostics, not in any way associated with any kind of creation organization, as I like to say, they have no theological axe to grind. These 2 authors wrote a book in early 2000 called Who Built the Moon? Who? They personalized it, folks. They said, who built the moon? Well, this reminds me of a verse in the Bible. It's found in the book of Romans, chapter 1, and verse 20, where the Apostle Paul says that God's creation is what, class? Clearly seen. It's so clearly seen that secular scientists will look at the construct of the moon and say, boy, it really looks like somebody made the moon. And then they go on to use the same arguments that creationists make. But they don't want to be boxed into a biblical worldview, and so I won't go into what they believe, but at least they got it right when they showed how unique the moon is. And by the way, since then, they have found insects on the moon. Did you know that? Scientists are calling them lunatics. Thank you. Thank you. So this obviously is evidence for design, right? Evidence for design. Design means what? A designer. Creation means a creator. Here's the creationist friend right here, the scanning electron microscope. I love scanning electron microscopes. I don't know how to operate them, but certainly they reveal intricate detail of God's living creation, even though it's been corrupted by sin. So the scanning electron microscope really begins to show the unique diversity of God's creation. For example, I'm a parasitologist. I study parasites, and a lot of parasites are spread by arthropod vectors, or insects. And so I like insects. I had entomology in graduate school and did a lot of investigation and all that at that time. The world's smallest free-living insect seems to now have ended with the precise measurement of what they call the featherwing beetle. The featherwing beetle. It's been recently retrieved from fungus in Colombia. The smallest individual measured an astounding almost 1/3 of a millimeter. Now, what's interesting is you can see this dime held on its edge. The edge of a dime is 1 millimeter. And so this featherwing beetle, you could stack one on top of the other, 3 of them, and it would be just a little over 1 millimeter. That's incredible. That is beyond incredible. Because when you look at these little beetles, which are about 1/3 of a millimeter long, and then you look at the 6 legs, and the legs are articulated just like any arthropod. Arthropods have paired jointed appendages and a chitinous exoskeleton. And you look at these appendages, the 6 appendages, the legs of this featherwing beetle, which is about 1/3 of a millimeter in length, and those tiny joints have to have articulations moved by even tinier muscles inside. How small would those muscles be in order to cause that articulation of those legs? It's utterly amazing. This is a fruit fly compound eye, and so you wouldn't know that if you didn't look at these electron micrographs in any detail. This is what they took, the picture of your common fruit fly, and we know that time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like a banana. Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. This one individual, Paul Gabrielson, said in 2013, and he's no creationist, an insect's compound eye is what he called, as a secular individual, an engineering marvel. High resolution, wide field of view, incredible sensitivity to motion, all, he said, in a compact package. Now you can see these little bumps here, and each one of these bumps is the anterior end of a long structure that is called the ommatidia. And so these half circles, these bumps here, are called the cornea of the individual ommatidia. And ommatidia is a plural, ommatidium is the singular there. But this gives a fruit fly such incredible vision. We could say this evening that fruit flies have 20/20 vision. That's how good their vision is. It's quite amazing, and this is what it looks like. So here's a single ommatidium with the cornea that you can see in the top of the screen there. And insects need much what we call resolving power or resolution, the ability to distinguish between 2 sources. And that's what you need to have a good quality microscope, is to have good resolution so you can see separate entities. The Creator has increased the resolving power by reducing the size and increasing the number of complex ommatidia. Some call them photoreceptors, although they are a whole lot more than just receptors that take in photons of light. As you can see in this diagram, this is a very, very sophisticated structure that has other cells that help to support the ommatidium. Nothing is left to chance. And so we would say that this is evidence of design, these individual ommatidia. Well, that brings us into a field called nanotechnology. Nano means incredibly small, so the technology associated with structures are very, very small. One researcher said about 16 years ago, Ben Feringa, that if you could build a motor 1/millionth of a millimeter across, now remember, the edge of a dime is what? 1 millimeter. So divide the edge of that dime 1 million times, and you get the structure that this individual is talking about. If you could build a motor 1/millionth of a millimeter across, you could fit a billion of them in a teaspoon. It seems incredible, he said, but people already use molecular motors on the scale. Now, since this was said 16 years ago, there's been a whole big field of nanotechnology that has opened up, specifically when it comes to biochemistry and biology. And that is the fact that we have approximately 70 trillion cells in our body, last time I counted. 70 trillion cells approximately, and each one of those cells has what you see there on the screen, a kinesin molecular machine that hauls cargo on a self-assembling microtubule highway. It actually moves. So this kinesin molecule has feet and actually walks down an actin highway, and that's all made of protein, 100% protein, carrying material from one end of your cell to the other. These are the smallest machines in the world, 1,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. Did Darwin know anything about this in 1859? All Darwin knew about the cell in 1859 was that it was a gelatinous structure that had a dark staining center. Darwin didn't even know anything about DNA. I'm not blaming him, but since the days of Darwin, we have unearthed and revealed just an incredible sophistication when it comes to the single cell. Even secular scientists say that the cell is a veritable microcosm of incredible sophisticated biochemical processes that is still we're learning a lot about. There's a publication called Cell, and in this publication called Cell, article after article after article about various processes within the cell. That brings us to the poster child of the intelligent design movement called the bacterial flagellum. As you can see on the screen there, it's kind of chunky there, but that's an actual, it's a drawing of a bacterial cell that operates by these flagella. You've heard of flagella. It actually spins, and it pushes a bacterial cell through its aqueous environment. Some cells only have one flagellum, others have a number of flagella. But the point I'm trying to make this evening is, if we take just a one flagella and we see how it hooks into the side of the bacterial cell. Now remember, bacteria have a cell wall. Do people and animals have a cell wall? No, we don't. We have just a plasma membrane. But bacteria, the prokaryotes, and plants do have a cell wall. In this case, this bacterial cell that you see on the screen has a flagellum that goes into the cell wall and makes an attachment. So what I want to do very quickly is just show you how the bacterial flagella goes into and attaches into the cell wall. So let's use our friend, the scanning electron microscope, and look at a photomicrograph of how this goes in there. And this is a diagram of it. This is not an actual picture, but it's a cartoon. It's a diagram. It helps us to understand how this flagellum goes into the bacterial cell wall there. And you can see words like bearing and stator and rotor. You can see the various words, engineering words, that the secular scientist uses in order to describe this bacterial flagellum. So what happened was, secular researchers decided to try and get a picture using the scanning electron microscope of the motor of the bacterial flagellum. And so let's look at an electron micrograph of a flagellum. And over to the right-hand side of the screen there is the actual flagellar motor. It's kind of ghostly, it's not precise because that motor has to be magnified thousands and thousands of times in order to see it. Now, this bacterial motor that you see there is made of protein, 100% protein. Think about the white of an egg before you cook it. The white of an egg is almost 100% protein, some water. On the left-hand side of the screen are some axles that are obviously designed, that are designed by engineers and put together and to very, very fine tolerances. And so the secular evolutionist would look at the axles that you see on the left-hand side of the screen there and say, those are obviously designed. But they'll look at the flagellar motor that has to be magnified thousands of times, that is made of pure protein, and they have to come to the conclusion, because of their secular worldview, that it is not designed. It's not designed, even though we can see electron micrographs of it. Let's compare this steel construct of the axles with a flagellar motor. and come to some very interesting conclusion here. First of all, both have a drive shaft, both have bushings, both have a universal joint, they both have a rotor, they both have rings, a clutch. Whoa, wait a minute. A clutch? Does that bacterial flagellum have a clutch? The answer is yes, it does. In 2008, National Science Foundation made the discovery that the bacterial flagellum that you can only blow up many thousands of times in order to see it actually has a clutch. And they made a diagram showing the clutch engaged and the clutch disengaged that helps the bacteria to determine, as far as a bacterium can determine anything, when to use the flagella and when to put it in neutral, applying the clutch. Looking at this, folks, is when the hair in the back of my neck went up. Because what we're looking at is what? We're looking at the very fingerprint of the Creator. That's what I say. I say, well, it reminds me of a verse in the Bible. It's found in the book of Romans, chapter 1 and verse 20, where God says that his creation is clearly seen. So we look at this bacterial flagella, and we see the clutch there and the assembly associated with it. Did the Apostle Paul know anything about this? He knew nothing about this. So how much more responsible are we in the 21st century that use electron microscopy and such as we look at this and give glory to the Creator and not the creation? Certainly, clearly, this is evidence of design. When the evolutionist wants evidence of design, I give them the moon on a big scale. I give them bacteria flagella on the very, very small scale. But both shout creation. As you're sitting here this evening, you have ATP synthase. That's a fancy way of saying these are enzymes made of 100% protein that help to phosphorylate adenosine diphosphate into adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate, if you remember from high school, is the energy currency of the cell. When those high energy bonds break, it releases energy to do work, whether it's to run the 100-yard dash or the fluttering of an eyelid or the peristaltic movement within your large intestine. It all has to do with ATP synthase. And this is happening hand over fist as you're sitting here right now. You're being kept alive by nothing less than trillions upon trillions of real mechanical rotary engines spinning at 30,000 revolutions per minute. And I give you the crux, the coup de grace right here in this presentation this evening as we draw to a close. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, as you're sitting here this evening, you have 70 plus trillion cells that make up you, your body. In a vast, vast majority of your cells, you have DNA found in the nucleus of the cell. You do not have DNA in your red blood cells. They are what we call in biology anucleate, meaning without a nucleus. That's one of the reasons why they don't live very long. They only live about 3 months. And then your liver and your spleen absorbs the old erythrocytes or red blood cells. But folks, as you're sitting here, on any given day, you are being irradiated by cosmic energy, by UV light. Your cells are being corrupted to a certain extent by certain chemicals and all that. And so you have as many as 1 million individual molecular lesions. Lesions are just atypical aberrations per cell per day. Do the math. We have 70 trillion cells, 1 million lesions each cell per day, 70 trillion times. That's a lot of damage being done. However, the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, has designed what you see there. You see that little man who's going up and down the spiral helix of the DNA molecule, and he's holding a structure in his hand there, and that structure are 2 nitrogenous bases that are hooked together by what we call in biology hydrogen bonds. And so here's the kicker right here. Do you remember I said to you that these structures in your cells are made of 100% protein, and I gave the example of the white of an egg? Let's take a little bit of the white of an egg and just make it so it's submicroscopic. So you get a little bit of that white of an egg, and you can only see it utilizing an electron microscope because it's so very small. And then let's do something else. Let's, what's the word I use? Let's program that little submicroscopic bit of protein, program it so it's able to make a distinction between lesions in your DNA and leave the rest of your DNA alone. Are you with me? So right now, God has created these repair enzymes. Remember, enzymes are proteins, little bits of white of an egg, just to give you kind of an analogy, that is programmed by the Creator to go up and down your DNA looking for lesions and then repairing them. Repairing them in biochemistry, we call it dehydration synthesis. And through this dehydration synthesis, they repair the enzymes, and we kind of take it for granted. And so this is kind of what it looks like, and more specifically, the colors are all off. The colors are added just so you can make a distinction there. But this is what this little bit of protein that is actually be programmed to go up and down your DNA and make those repairs. And since there is so much damage being done to our cells in a 24-hour period, and it takes so long for these repair enzymes to affect their change, what has God done? He's made a whole bunch of them. He's made a whole bunch of them. And so again, this would be what? Evidence for design. You want evidence for design? I give you the DNA repair enzymes. There are now textbooks this thick just on the various families of repair enzymes. And it's a large, large field, and it's getting larger as we're realizing just how important these repair enzymes are. And by the way, speaking of protein, the phenomena of the rise of proteins will remain, as one researcher said, something like close to a what? A miracle. A miracle. They use the M word. A miracle. And that's because proteins are so insanely complex. I used to teach protein synthesis to my pre-med students. Proteins, when they're made, have to undergo primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary folding. So the protein molecule, once it's made, it's got to be folded in an exactly specific way. And the reason why we have many diseases today is due to atypical folding of the protein as it's being produced in our bodies. Very quickly, let me give you this one example. I know we're out of time. Do we normally attribute these high-precision gears from an explosion in a steel mill? We see that gears, when they are constructed and designed by engineers, nothing is left to chance when they build these gears. Nothing is left to chance. So using our friend the electron microscope, a British zoologist took pictures of the legs of this tiny insect called the planthopper nymph. And he's an atheist, and so when he used the electron microscope, he went into very specifically the construct of these legs of the planthopper nymph, which is very small to begin with. And he said in his article, what we have is a prototype for incredibly small, high-speed, high-precision, what's a word class? Gears, high-precision gears. And this is the picture that he took. And he even used the word gears when he described how these gears interact. And it's very, very successful because guess what? We still have planthopper nymphs today. And so nothing is left to chance, I would submit, as we look at the gears of the planthopper nymph. However, because this individual, his name is Gary Sutton, is an evolutionary atheist, he went out of his way to worship the creation and not the creator. Look what he said in the article. He said, these gears are not what? Designed. He knows what everybody's going to say. You know, when you looked at those gears, what did you think? That's incredible. We're looking at living gears. That's amazing. And so he went out of his way to say these gears are not designed, they are evolved. It's a faith statement. Representing high speed and precision machinery evolved, there it is again, for synchronization in the animal world. In other words, he's wearing a blindfold, and the blindfold is called what? No design. No design. What would creationists say to this? We would say that God's creation is clearly seen, and here's what we would say. These gears are created, representing high speed and precision machinery designed for synchronization in the animal world. What have we done? We've used creation scissors. And we've cut away that no design blindfold. Just get out a pair of creation scissors, and then you can clearly see God's living creation, can't you?